policy at DJI, one of the largest suppliers of lightweight drones worldwide. Christian is responsible for all interactions between DJI and government stakeholders in the region and helps drive DJI's efforts to make drones increasingly safe to use. Since joining DJI in 2016, Christian has been working closely with stakeholders across Europe on shaping the future European drone rules and creating a safe, viable, and fair market for the drone industry in Europe. Christian, over to you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. I hope you can all hear and see me now. I did have a bit of a bandwidth issue earlier, but hopefully that's been fixed. So exactly what I was going to talk to you today about is how do the regulations look like from a manufacturer perspective, and how does this new conformance assessment process actually work in practice? And you can say as a bonus also to address why aren't there any drone category labeled drones on the market yet. I'll throw in a bit of disclaimer because obviously I have been working with DJI since 2016, so I've been heavily involved in the drafting of the EASA rules, which means that my general perspective of this is from an EASA perspective. I am quite familiar with the UK regulation, and it is obviously very similar, as we heard from Jerry earlier. But there might be some things in the presentation that do reflect an EASA context rather than a UK specific. But I think it should capture everything. So talk to me a bit about where does DJI stand on the regulations? What do we think about the regulations? How does this CE marking work in practice? And what is the drone classes? Because it's a bit different from the CE marking. What are the actual requirements that we're going to be facing on the drones? And then not least some of the challenges around standard development, notified bodies. UK equivalent would be a conformity assessment body, or the lack thereof, and then a bit of a timeline to see where things will be progressing in the next months. So first of all, generally from a DJI perspective, when we look at the regulations, Europe and UK wide, as I said, we've been engaged for the better part of 5 years since EASA started drafting what would become the regulations. And it's important to realize that in such discussions, and I'm sure Jerry will testify to that because he was very much a part of it, it's not perfect. There are things that we had to give up along the way from our perspective in order to make progress or achievements in other fields. So it is really the art of a compromise, and the number of different stakeholders who've been involved in drafting this regulation, it's countless, right? It goes way beyond the drone industry. It goes into manned aviation, it goes into security, it goes into privacy, it goes into environment. And at the end of the day, we've ended up with the regulations as a compromise between all those different interests. And you can say, to be honest, it's still quite an achievement, which is also what we feel as the immediate impact on manufacturers, that specifically in the open category, we now have product requirements on the drones, as I'll come back to through the CE marking or UKCA marking. That is really a world first. It's the first country or region in the world that has gone to the extent of coming up with detailed product requirements on how should a drone function, how should it be built, and what kind of features should be on it. Obviously, it does put some constraints on a drone manufacturer in terms of how we design our product, how we manufacture products. Those of you close to engineering will know that's never to the liking of engineers to have those sort of constraints around you, but nevertheless, it does create a level playing field for all manufacturers around drones. And you can say, I think it's not going to be the last region in the world. What we know from other regulations is that Europe is often a front runner, so I would be surprised if we don't see similar things popping up in other regions of the world. We might even see competing things, as we know from other parts of aviation. but it's certainly just the first achievement. So the downside of creating requirements like this is that they're supposed to create certainty for the manufacturers, because they're supposed to tell us exactly what we can do and how we should build things. But
please hold.
I think I was kicked out. I got a please hold. I hope you can hear me. Otherwise, I'll count on the organizers to send me a chat message.
We can still hear you, Christian. Please go ahead.
Oh, that's fine. That was odd. Yeah, so the certainty only works if you've got a stable baseline. So if you've got everything in place, you've got the certainty for manufacturers. The situation we're in right now is a bit confusing for everyone, I think, because, as I said, we've been doing this for 5 years and we haven't really passed the finish line yet, because we're still awaiting for the emergence of industry standards. And only when we've got that, we actually know what the baseline is for setting out production of new products and compliant products. Then other parts of the regulation, not really specific for manufacturers, but obviously there is the thing around training requirements, that it is a substantial change from any existing regime in the UK or continental Europe, and especially for hobbyists. The fact that there are kind of comprehensive training requirements now is completely different from what we've seen in the past, and I think that's going to take some effort for everyone to get accustomed with that new situation. And then finally, on the plus side, obviously the specific category is what's going to allow the industry to flourish in years to come. I mean, we all know what the hype of the drone industry is. It's BVLOS, it's autonomy. That is what we can achieve through the specific category. We will see the emergence of predefined risk assessments and standard scenarios, and the use of SORA or safety assessments in general to allow for these greater new uses of drones. So in general, you can say we have a positive impression of the achievements made with the new regulation, but there are still some things to look out for. Just a quick recap. I didn't do an introduction of DJI, but you wouldn't be on a drone seminar if you didn't know who DJI was. But just to recap, we built products from the Mavic Mini weighing at 249 grams up to the M300, which fully loaded will weigh in around 10 kilos. Also some bigger agriculture drones, but this is really the bulk of the market. And we operate with consumer and enterprise lines, unlike the new regulation that only focuses on risk. This is also kind of an artificial split, because you can say there's plenty of professional operators and enterprise users using consumer drones. It doesn't go the other way, though. There aren't that many consumers who step into our enterprise series of drones. Our products generally fit in the open category, although there is certainly uses for them in the specific category. That really depends on the kind of use case and scenario you're going to be using them in, but generally we look at them as open category products, at least for now. And they're obviously all equipped with some technical features that come close to what's going to be required under the new regulations. Geofencing, the way the control link works, the way they're built, all that kind of stuff. So it's going to be, let's say, an enhancement of what you know from existing DJI drones, but no major revamp looks to be required for our product lines. Now, we often talk about the CE marking as the new thing on drones in the open category. And there's actually quite a distinction to be made here, because the CE marking has been around for years, just not drone specific. And all DJI drones are CE compliant and CE marked. You can go to the CE dedicated part of our website if you want to find certificates or declarations of conformity, as the one I've attached here. The new thing is the drone classes. So it's to say CE marking and drone classes, they're not the same. The CE marking requirements and the process on how you obtain CE marking. They're not new because we're already going through that. And you see that on the right here, that currently I took here the Mavic 2 Enterprise. We declared conformity with 6 EU directives or regulations through the use of 10 European norms, or where that is the case, if the standards are prescribed by regulations. And finally, you can say it's a process that we've been accustomed with for the 15 years we've been in business, because you cannot sell products in Europe without this, or in the UK for that sake. What's new is the drone class identification label. It follows a similar process, but the requirements are significantly different because they are obviously drone specific. To give you a bit of an idea on how that works, you've got the new classes, class 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then essentially you've got the different requirements on what's going to be needed to obtain a declaration of conformity for a product in each of those classes. Most people often just look at the top line and say it's the weight limit, but it goes way beyond that. It needs to have a maximum speed. For C0 and C1 drones, you need to have a maximum attainable height in C0. In C2, it can be selectable, but you still need a height select feature. It must have a maximum noise level. This is particularly an issue we spend a lot of time negotiating with the European Commission, what those exact levels are and how they're measured. And it goes on with those different requirements. But here you really see how how it looks like for category to category. So if you want to produce a drone in class 1, it needs to be less than 900 grams or have a kinetic energy impact of less than 80 joules, and then it needs to be conformed with each of these features we see in the table below. So quite a complex new setting. So when we build a drone, if anyone builds a drone that we think is compliant with these requirements, how do you actually achieve and prove conformity of the drones? Well, you do that through the use of European harmonized standards. I'll get back to the development of those a bit later. But essentially, you as a manufacturer got 3 options to show conformity. And it's option A, B, and C here, as we see. Option A requires a notified body and the harmonized standards, because there essentially we do the testing together with a notified body, UK equivalent conformity assessment body. Option B, we test the product according to the standards and have a full quality management system, ISO certified, in place in both production and design of the drones. Or option C, you can, with a notified body, if there are no standards in place, define the appropriate test standards and then declare compliance through that avenue. That obviously requires you have a notified body. So what I highlighted here is that option A, you need a notified body and standards. Option B, you need standards and a full QMS. And option C, you need a notified body. And you can say it's pretty easy for any manufacturer to select which option to take, except that we have a bit of a lack of those. I'll get back to that on next slide. So the challenges around the standards is that the standard development has been ongoing under EU aviation standard making body ASD STAN since 2018. We've just seen the drafts published the 1st of February, so a bit over a month after the regulations came into force. And they're currently in a balloting phase, accepting comments and amendments from national standard development organizations, I think including BSI. So if you want to have your saying in the final development on standards, it's through BSI. Once that is done and everything's been resolved, only then these standards can be formally adopted and published by European accredited standard development body CEN or CENELEC. And that's when it becomes, you can say, essentially law, and we can derive legal values from it when they become European norms. But so far, only the draft's ready, and Still a bit to go until we can actually have final versions of the necessary standards. So that's the first challenge. Second challenge, I pulled this off the EU Commission website for notified bodies. You can go in and find notified bodies for any type of regulation you're looking for. And if you look on the top, it says in the top right corner, found 0, because there are no notified body anywhere in Europe to deal with the requirements for UAS. So even if we had the standards, we wouldn't be able to work with a notified body to actually obtain the declaration of conformity and prove conformity. On top of that, what we are hearing both from companies we're in touch with and from the Euro Commission is that there are actually quite a low number of companies actually expressing interest in the notified body business, essentially because it's not attractive enough, apparently. Then on top of that, this was a bit of a positive surprise to me. The EU also carries a list of countries or states that has a process in place for notifying authorities. So that means do these countries we've listed here, they've actually got the procedures in place for how to notify a body, so it becomes a notified body. The positive surprise from my side was that this was only 5 states who had that in December prior to the regulations coming into force, but now at least it's up to 14. It says 15 over there, but the EU itself is also listed. So 14 states got the process in place to notify bodies, but still no companies quite there. Maybe we'll come back to that later for Jerry, if there is an equivalent process in place in the UK and if there's any interest from companies, because I must admit I'm not familiar with the situation currently in the UK. So finally, a bit on the timeline, because pointing out what does it take to achieve conformity, yes, but we've seen that there are some gaps. But where do we go from here? Everything we can see indicates that the standards will be adopted to a stage where they're good enough for us to use by a second quarter of this year. It's difficult to say if it's going to be early or late second quarter, but somewhere in second quarter of this year, if there are no surprises in the comments received from national standard development organizations. Notified bodies, as I said, we know that there are some companies out there interested. They will still have to go through the national accreditation processes. That's not really for us to say how that looks or works, but what we're hearing is that they expect to be ready Q2, maybe early Q3 again of this year. So once we've got that in place, we've got the standards, we've got the notified body, you can say in theory, you could then start producing CE or drone category identification labeled drones. But obviously then you've got kind of the internal workings of any manufacturer deciding on which products get a drone class identification label, which label is it? And then finally, before you do that, it can be placed on the market. And then that probably means late this year at some point. I'm not making any promises, but that I think that would be a good hope that we could have something ready for the end of the year. So finally, just summing up, as I said, EU, UK regulations, really the first regional harmonization of UAS regulation anywhere in the world. Even other neighboring regions haven't made any progress like this. So big achievement there. Kudos to everyone who's been involved. Jerry particularly played a big role in that, so I'll always be grateful for that. The existing non-drone specific product regulation under the CE regime is already there. It's already required. That's not new. The process is not new. But the drone-specific requirements in the open category are completely new. And that's covering much beyond aviation safety, as we know. We know that there's debate about remote ID, both in Europe and America and in the UK, with the conspicuity work ongoing as well. So it's going to be interesting to see where that goes. Then the kind of current setbacks, we do not have any standards yet. We do not have any notified bodies to work with, and there's limited interest in that business. But the good thing is we do expect clarity before the end of the year on these matters. And then I just thrown in a final but quite important note here, because it's one of the things that is flourishing on social media. It's one of the questions we quite frequently get is, can I give my existing drone a drone category label? And obviously, in theory, you could, but only if DJI offers that as a feature. And the retrofitting process is something that's still unclear, and it is still for any manufacturer to decide whether or not to take existing products through a retrofitting process to obtain a new drone category identification label. And I'll turn back to Rachel then.
Great, thank you, Christian. And thank you everyone who's been sending in questions. Just a reminder, please do continue sending in your questions, and if they are for a particular speaker, please do indicate that so we can get them to address this when we get to our panel discussion.